You know, when you think of the Doors, a certain image probably pops into your head, right? Jim Morrison, the leather pants, the Lizard King, all the hits you hear on the radio. But that's really just scratching the surface. What we're going to do is peel back that whole myth to look at the architecture underneath it all, the intellectual, the cinematic, and the sonic choices that made them, without a doubt, one of the most unique and frankly dangerous bands of the 1960s. And it all starts right here, with this one line from an 18th century poet, William Blake. This wasn't just some cool-sounding phrase they picked for a band name. No, this was a mission statement. It was the whole point. They weren't just there to play you some catchy pop songs. They were there to, cleanse the doors of perception, no matter how wild or unsettling that process might be.
So that's the big question, isn't it? In an era that we remember for flower power and all this hippie optimism, how on earth did a band, born from the minds of two film students, end up casting such a long, dark shadow over the entire decade? Well, the answer starts, of all places, on a beach in California. Okay, picture this. It's Venice Beach, July 1965. You've got this chance encounter between two guys who just graduated from UCLA Film School. One's a poet named Jim Morrison. The other is a keyboardist named Raymond Zarek. And this meeting, it sets everything in motion. See, this is not your typical garage band origin story. The roots of the Doors are actually in cinema. So Morrison, who'd apparently been living on rooftops just writing nonstop, was kind of shy about his work, but he finally agrees to recite the lyrics to a poem he wrote, Moonlight Drive. And for Ray Manzarek with his filmmaker's brain, this wasn't just a song. He literally heard a movie score. He could see this dark, moody film playing out in his head, and he just knew right then and there that he had to write the music for it. And this is the band's unique DNA. I mean, look at this mix. You've got two film students who are obsessed with poetry and Chicago blues. You bring in a guitarist who's trained in the super delicate art of flamenco, and then you have a drummer who thinks in the complex shifting rhythms of jazz. I mean, no other band looked like this. This was not a recipe for top 40 pop hits. This was a formula for something completely new. So that wild combination of talent, it wasn't just a quirky backstory. It actually forced them to innovate. It made them create a sonic architecture that, honestly, had never been heard before in rock and roll. It all kicked off with a huge problem. They were a rock band, but they didn't have a bassist. And they tried. They auditioned a few, but nobody really fit their strange, dynamic vibe. The solution they came up with would end up defining their entire sound. The solution was Ray Manzarek. He just put this small Fender keyboard right on top of his organ and started playing all the bass lines with his left hand. What started out as a major limitation became their greatest sonic asset. It gave their music this sharp, punchy, almost menacing low end that was totally different from the warm, round sound of a typical bass guitar. I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. Ray Manzarek is essentially two musicians at the same time. His left hand is the bass player, laying down the entire foundation of the song, while his right hand is the lead organist, creating those iconic, swirling, psychedelic melodies. He was literally a one-man, two-handed orchestra.
And then there's Robbie Krieger on guitar. Now, he wasn't just chunking out loud, bluesy power chords like every other guitarist at the time. Nope. He was using his background in flamenco and fingerstyle to weave these intricate, beautiful melodic lines all around Manzarek's keyboards. He created these textures that could be incredibly delicate one moment and then just slide into absolute distorted chaos the next.
And the guy holding this whole wild thing together was John Densmore. He wasn't just a timekeeper, not at all. He was a jazz drummer. He would listen, really listen, to the dynamics of Morrison's poetry, rising and falling with his voice, building tension and then releasing it. He was having a conversation with the lyrics, not just playing a beat. So this incredibly unique sound, it became the perfect vehicle for an equally unique philosophy. See, while the rest of the world was heading to San Francisco with flowers in their hair, the Doors were digging into the darkness. They were deliberately positioning themselves as the shadow of the 1960s. Think about it. The rest of the counterculture was chanting peace and love, and Jim Morrison was writing about chaos and death. While everyone else was talking about flower power, they called themselves erotic politicians. They saw the stage not as a place for a concert, but as a shamanic ritual, a theater of cruelty that was designed to shock the audience into a new kind of awareness. And people definitely noticed. You know that term, Gothic rock? Well, it wasn't invented in the 80s with all those bands in England wearing black. It was actually first used way back in 1967, specifically to describe the Doors. A critic heard their music and immediately knew this was something totally separate from the rest of the scene, something darker, more violent, something Gothic. And this darkness wasn't just for show. Not at all. It was deeply intellectual. Their rebellion was fueled by a whole library of poets and philosophers. They were channeling William Blake's quest for perception, Nietzsche's idea of the chaotic Dionysian artist, Antonin Artaud's theater of cruelty to shock people out of complacency, and the poet Rimbaud's call for a derangement of the senses to achieve a higher vision. But here's the thing. When you build your entire artistic identity around confrontation and deranging the senses, sooner or later you are going to collide head-on with the real world. And for the Doors, that collision happened in Miami. It became the breaking point for the whole band. March 1st, 1969, at this chaotic, completely oversold concert at a place called the Dinner Key Auditorium, a frustrated and, well, heavily intoxicated Jim Morrison decided he was going to push his whole theater of cruelty idea to its absolute limit. The backlash was immediate, and it was overwhelming. I mean, just 4 days later, a warrant is out for Morrison's arrest. A rally for decency, which was basically aimed right at them and endorsed by President Nixon, drew 30,000 people. And then the phone calls started. Venues all over the country began canceling shows. The establishment had decided the Doors were a threat that needed to be shut down. And that was it. One night of confrontational theater sparked a nationwide moral panic that got them blacklisted across the country. Radio stations dropped their songs, promoters wouldn't book them, their entire lifeblood as a live band was just cut off almost overnight. But here's the ironic part. Silencing them on stage didn't silence their influence. Actually, you could argue it just made it stronger. It cemented their myth, and it guaranteed that their dark, intellectual approach to rock would echo for decades, creating this incredible, enduring Gothic legacy. I mean, just look at the family tree here. The dark, brooding atmosphere and baritone vocals of a band like Joy Division, the wild, confrontational stage antics of Iggy Pop, the entire aesthetic of bands like Susie and the Banshees and The Cure. You can draw a straight line back to the Doors. They wrote the blueprint for post-punk, for goth, and for so much of alternative rock. So why, after all these years, do we keep talking about the Doors? Well, it's their sonic innovation, that keyboard-led sound that shouldn't have worked. It's the cultural friction they created, a perfect case study in the fight between art and censorship. It's how they proved that pop music could be high art. And, of course, it's the archetype, the doomed poet-rocker persona that Jim Morrison basically perfected, a role that echoes to this day. Which really just leaves us with one final question to think about. Were the Doors simply a dark reflection of the 1960s, a product of all its chaos and conflict? Or were they something more? Were they prophets, maybe, of the cynicism, the introspection, and the artistic friction that would come to define the decades that followed? That right there is the shadow they still cast today.